Good evening. I'm Mike Traugott, the director of the ICPSR Summer Program, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another in our series of lectures that we hold in honor of Hubert Tad Blaylock, who was an official representative to the consortium from the University of Washington and also served on the ICPSR Council. Tad was a noted statistician and also a researcher interested in group relations in the United States and other countries abroad. Tonight, we have a presentation by somebody who is actually an alumna of the summer program, Natalie Jackson. She's currently the Director of Research at the Public Religion Research Institute in Washington, D.C. This is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization conducting research at the intersection of religion, culture, and public policy. Previously, she held senior and management positions at the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion, Huffington Post, and Just Capital. Natalie has a PhD in political science from the University of Oklahoma, and she also had a postdoctoral associate position at Duke University. The title of her talk is Non-Academic Career Opportunities for PhDs, and Natalie is going to talk about the general aspects of this particular area as well as her own personal experience. So, Natalie, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm excited to share a little bit about non-academic careers for social science PhDs. I made it a little bit more specific than my initial title. Let me get my screen share going. There we go. This is something I get a lot of questions about. So I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to kind of collate it all and put it together. I'm sure there will be questions as we go. Some things can be generalized, some things are going to be, it depends on the situation. So I'm going to do as much generality as I can and kind of thread my own experience throughout here as well. I can get the slide to change. So why should you listen to me? So Mike read you the brief background. Here's the slightly more detailed. So in 2011, I went from grad school at Oklahoma to a postdoc at Duke. While I was at the postdoc, I kind of got to thinking, you know, maybe I don't want to go into academia full time. I had always wanted to be a professor. That was my entire purpose in going to graduate school. But once I was sitting at Duke, I was away from what I had done all through grad school, which was actually collecting survey data. I was assigned as a research assistant at the University of Oklahoma Public Opinion Learning Laboratory, which was a telephone survey call center. And I hadn't realized until I was at Duke how much I loved that job. And so I began to think about my options. Fortunately, since my second or third year of graduate school, I had been attending the American Association for Public Opinion Research conferences, where if you've never been to APOR or seen any of their stuff, it's the National Organization for Public Opinion. It covers all aspects of public opinion, and the membership is generally about a third academic, a third government, nonprofit, and a third corporate. So I had already been exposed to all these other people who had PhDs and were working for the government, or were working for a nonprofit, or were doing surveys within a large company. So I had that exposure and it was on my radar. Long story short, I started thinking about it, started applying to positions, and ended up in what I'll refer to as an alt-ac, alt-academic position at the Marist Institute for Public Opinion. So the Marist poll is active in election polling. They do state level polling for NBC. They also do national polling for NPR and PBS. So I suddenly dropped into the world of election and very public political polling. I loved it. So I intended to stay there for a little bit, but then an opportunity came up to jump to the Huffington Post and do election forecasting and data science. My job title initially was data scientist, but I was on the editorial side of the newsroom. Most data scientists that you see in companies like that are, on the development side. I was on the newsroom side, which was a little bit different. And I worked on poll aggregation and election forecasting. We all know how election forecasting went in 2016. If you want to know my thoughts on that, I'll point you to something that I actually published earlier today on my Twitter feed. So that's a totally different topic that we'll leave right there. In mid-2017, I made a shift. After 2016, I was pretty done with politics. I got headhunted for a position at a nonprofit doing business and kind of corporate type survey work. So I took that job and went to doing that. After a couple of years, I wasn't, it was good to have the break from politics, but I really am a political scientist at heart. And so I wanted to get back toward politics, but not horse race and election. So I've been very fortunate to land at PRRI, where we do mostly policy work. We focus on issues like immigration, white supremacy and racism, religion, obviously it's in the name, and kind of the central cleavages in society and in politics and policy. We do a lot of LGBTQ issues research as well. So I've had 4 different completely non-academic positions, and I've gone about getting them in 4 totally different ways. So I'll talk a little bit about that. One caution that I'll say, I never did the academic job market, so as far as comparing one to the other, I can't really speak to that. So I just want to put that limitation out there. I did not go on the academic job market, so I don't know what the stress level is in comparison or anything like that. I know the academic job market is incredibly stressful. So, but I have done this non-academic job market a few different ways. So I'll talk about some of that. A little bit of an outline here. The first thing I'll cover is types of non-academic jobs and kind of what the life looks like and how that differs from academia. I have many friends who are academics, so I feel like I can, and we have conversations about how my life differs from theirs. And so I feel like I can fairly reliably speak to how the biggest things that are different. Then I'll talk a little bit about networking and finding job ads, primarily through the use of LinkedIn. I find that most academics think that LinkedIn is completely useless, and it probably is for their purposes. It's incredibly useful in the non-academic world when you're trying to find a job. So I'll show you a few things on that you'll want to have set up if you're going to do the non-academic market. The other big thing is converting a CV to a resume and applying for jobs. There are some things that are very different than how you would put together a package to apply to an academic job. So we'll talk a little bit about that. A few brief points about interviews and job offers. The interview is not a 3-day or 2-day marathon of interviews. It is structured differently. Then there's a little bit of a now what. How do you talk to your advisor if you're interested in this? How do you know? What's the timeline? We'll hit those things toward the end, and then I will stop in plenty of time for us to do some Q&A. So first, we have types of non-academic jobs and the non-academic life. This is the pretty basic. You probably already know this, but non-academic places to find jobs. There are kind of three major categories: corporate, nonprofit, and government. Corporate is often large companies that hire data scientists. Facebook hires for many, many different functions. Facebook loves social science PhDs, and I happen to know that they pay very well. So if that's something that you're interested in, that's one outlet. There are also probably some surprising places that you can land. I started the interviewing process at Capital One for a data science position at one point. The bank, Capital One. I read a focus on a recent PhD on the American Political Science Association website earlier today that he had gone to work for a medical company. They were, designing algorithms and doing data science work to support medical functions. So just because your PhD is in social science or whatever it's in, doesn't mean your skills are not transferable. So you might be surprised with how many different corporate entry points there actually are. If you're a good quantitative person, anything data science, you're likely to be able to qualify for. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the interview stage. Nonprofit, this is a big one in DC, where you can't throw a rock without hitting a think tank. My organization is a nonprofit. The organization I worked for in New York City was a nonprofit. They're just all over the map. Generally, you get a little bit more of a research type job, whereas corporate might be more data science, depending on what type of company it is. Nonprofits, often you're working in a smaller environment, unless you happen to get a job at one of the larger ones. And you're often producing research on a topic or on multiple topics, like what my organization does. So if you're more of a policy-oriented person, think tanks and nonprofits are really great places to work. For government, the options are kind of all over the map. There are lots of government agencies, federal, state, local, you name it. The advantage of government is they're all standardized. The pay scales are standardized. It's not only DC. I should say the nonprofit think tank world is not only DC either, but think state organizations as well. Some job titles. I'll talk more about this in searching for jobs. Job titles are all over the map out here. A lot falls under data scientist. Nobody's actually sure what a data scientist is, so you'll have to read the job ad to know for sure what they're looking for. Lots of things are classified as research analyst or associate. Lots of things are director, statisticians. Statistician doesn't always mean they're only looking for a statistics degree. It's kind of like data scientist. Sometimes they give it this title, but it's not what you're thinking in the strict academic sense. So basically, the list goes on. And I saw this question pop up, and conveniently, I had it queued up here. So alt academic is alternate academic. These are jobs that are at universities or colleges, but they're not faculty. So a lot are staff or administrative positions, research positions, special projects and initiatives. The University of Michigan, the program you're in, ICPSR, which is under the umbrella of ISR, the Institute for Social Research, the big employer of alt academic PhDs. You know, these are not tenure track positions, but they're research positions at a university. It can be a good transition into non-academic work that keeps you in higher education. I know it made me feel a lot better when I landed my first job at Marist College. Even though I was not a professor, I was still connected to the college environment. And that provided a continuity that I really appreciated. These alt academic jobs can be tricky to find because they're not just everywhere. They're generally at larger universities. Some of the smaller places that have survey polling shops are a little bit different. Marist is a small liberal arts college where you typically would not find an alt academic job. But these are very nice jobs if you still want to remain close to the university life. So, two of the biggest differences, I'll transition a little bit from the type of jobs to what's different. There are two big differences that I highlight for people. One is the work hours. So when you're an academic, you're a professor, you obviously have your teaching hours, you have office hours, you have some things that are scheduled. But in large part, you end up kind of working whenever. That's something that's very different. The idea of a 9-to-5 has changed a lot in the private sector or the government sector or whatever sector you end up in. So depending on where you land, there is a lot of flexibility, but there is usually some form of core hours that you are expected to be at work. My office generally operates on a 9-to-6 schedule with an hour for lunch. Obviously that has changed since we're all at home now, but in general, we're expected to have coverage from 9-to-6. And what that means, like for my team, I manage the research team. So I'm expected to have enough personnel on duty that we could answer reporter requests between the hours of 9 and 6 p.m. Usually that means we're all working 9-to-6. You might even have to log hours to projects, which is also something that can be a little bit disorienting at first. I have only had to do this in my current job. The previous 3, I did not have to log hours to projects. The reason for this is if you're funded by a grant, sometimes you need to log billable hours to the grant. Where I am now, we're 100% grant funded, so we have to log our billable hours 100% to grants. So that can be a bit of a shift. So, you know, work hours is a big deal. And just to reiterate, the concept of a 9-to-5 is not set in stone. It's not really concrete anymore. There's a lot more flexibility than there used to be, but it is still something that you need to be aware of in the lifestyle. The second big thing is that you are now working on someone else's agenda. Whereas as an academic, you're encouraged to develop your research agenda. It's largely what you are interested in / what you have worked out with your advisor to do. You know, there are a lot of things that are up to you. And where I'm sorry, I was looking at questions. You're in a non-academic job, your work goals are determined by someone else, and your work topics are usually determined by someone else. This is another place where it does depend on where you are, but you do have to recognize that you are not developing your own research agenda anymore. You are working on what the organization needs you to work on. And the level to which you do that is determined by your workplace. And one of the things I like to joke about when conferences come around is that submission dates are never real. So I do point out that deadlines are real and people depend on you to deliver. You won't have a creeping deadline like you do with particularly conferences. And for example, if you're submitting an article for publication, nobody except you and maybe your co-authors have a set time by which you need to do that. Whereas when you're working for someone else is saying, I need this work by this point. Another key difference is that you are not teaching. However, I will say that you can find adjunct opportunities if you want them. So when I was at Marist, I contacted the political science department and they basically said, we don't have anything that you can teach. So I contacted the math department and I ended up spending about 4 years, even after I left the Marist poll, I kept adjuncting at Marist teaching statistics. Now I am going into my second semester as an adjunct for American University here in DC. So I'm teaching graduate level research methods, which is very fun for me. I like teaching research methods from a practical standpoint. And these are who I have are mostly master's students that are, looking to go out into industry, into data science jobs. So that I get a lot of fun out of that. It's something that's out there. It's something that you can absolutely totally ignore if you don't want to do it. So moving to networking and finding jobs. This is my LinkedIn is your friend section of the talk. I am checking questions and most of these I will get to, and if I don't, I'll cover them at the end. But many of them are coming, so don't worry. And keep asking. So I posted a screenshot of my LinkedIn account. This is just the top portion of it. It's not very exciting. But LinkedIn has some very important uses outside of academia. I understand if you're not using it for academic purposes. I totally see that it doesn't make much sense. There is a lot of nonsense on LinkedIn. There are a lot of influencers and people, doing business organization kind of building on it. You can ignore all that. Here are the 3 things that are important in my mind. You can find what's out there and people who do what you're interested in. You can search for jobs. That's probably the most critical. And you can be found by headhunters and recruiters. It's probably second most critical. So to show you a little bit of how you can do those, oops, I didn't realize there would be lines through that, I apologize. This is just the basic LinkedIn search function. And what I did here was I typed in survey research. And so you can see it pops up suggestions. You can search for survey research in jobs. You can search for survey research in people. That would be if you want to find people who do what you do or do what you're interested in. Or you can find groups. I don't use LinkedIn groups a lot, but they do exist. It's kind of analogous to Facebook groups. You can join the group, and then it's kind of like a professional organization group. I personally have not gotten a lot of use out of that. That doesn't mean anything. I'm kind of a casual LinkedIn user at best, unless I'm actively looking for a job. And then just to show you another example, if you type in data scientist, you get different pop-up suggestions. So there's a data scientist and analyst group. There's a showcase page. You get different companies will pop up. So you can use the search function for anything. As far as finding people, once you've, what do you do once you've found people who do what you do? Well, you send them a message and an invitation to connect. And you say, I'm interested in what you do. Could we please connect? That happens all the time on LinkedIn. It's not something you have to feel awkward about. You just send it. The worst that happens is somebody ignores you. It's just not a big deal. I get probably, like I said, I'm a casual user at best when I'm not job searching, and I get probably 4 or 5 of those a week still. And, I answer them and talk to people. And so for qualitative research, I actually have, you could type in qualitative research on any of these as well. In fact, I've been trying to help someone find a job, and I currently have a job locator set for qualitative researcher or qualitative research. So it would work exactly the same. There are those jobs. A lot of companies do focus groups. A lot will be interested in interview skills, things like that. I would say, just based on my perception, purely qualitative roles are less common, but they are out there. And in fact, I was in the position of hiring a purely qualitative role in my last position. So I did go out looking for that person. So those definitely exist. Searching for jobs. Again, apologies for the lines through the screen. When you're searching for jobs, there's a little jobs icon. It's a little briefcase once you're in. You can literally just type in, with this, I typed in political science PhD, and I got results. I got 174 results. At some point in the ad, there's political science PhD mentioned. I probably should have put it in quotes. It's probably picking up each word individually. But the nice thing that it does is it sorts by relevance by default. So the job ads that come to the top are going to be the most relevant to your search terms. Now, if you're constantly searching, you can edit that and have it sort by date. Like, okay, I looked at all the ones that were posted last month. Let me look at what's new this month. So you can easily sort by that. Again, I just typed in data scientist to show you some of what pops up. You get a tech company. I'm not sure what future opportunity is. You get Facebook. Employers can promote jobs, so promoted jobs will show up higher in the list. And Booz Allen Hamilton. Data scientist returned 18,700 results. So that should tell you about how that is. So LinkedIn versus email. Often the advantage of LinkedIn is you don't have to be able to find somebody's email to be able to email them. If you do have an email address, that's perfectly appropriate as well. But if if you're unable to find an email address, a lot of people, don't have email on their pages. In academia, it's very common on your professor page, you have your email address listed right there. That's really much less common outside of academia. For example, my PRI email is not listed anywhere. It's not hard to figure out, but it's not listed anywhere. So that would be the advantage of LinkedIn, is you just don't have to have those you don't have to have those email addresses. So letting headhunters find you. This is probably one of the most fascinating parts of LinkedIn to me. I just find it really interesting. So headhunters and recruiters live on LinkedIn. And what they do is they're searching for people who have skills that they're looking for, particularly combinations of skills. So when you're setting up a LinkedIn profile, there will be this section called skills and endorsements. If you're just setting up, you won't have any endorsements yet. That's fine. I'm not sure how much endorsements matter anyway, so much as listing your skills. So my top skills show up in this way because I have quite a few endorsements on them. As you scroll down, so this first image is the top part of my skills section. The second image is kind of the mid part of my skills section. So it classifies into industry knowledge. And these classifications are automatic. I didn't set these up. Tools and technologies. This is one where you definitely want to put relevant quantitative things, programming languages, all that sort of thing. And then I have a third section, of interpersonal skills and other skills. So you'll notice one thing that I want to point out is I have some duplication here. So there's public opinion, opinion polling, political polling. I have regression analysis and statistics and, different variations of the same thing. That's intentional. You want to put as many skills down as you can in as many different ways, because that's how the headhunters and recruiters find you. That's how I was headhunted for the position that I ended up in, that I mentioned I got headhunted for. They found me on LinkedIn and sent me that message that said, hey, are you interested? I get those occasionally regardless. I just got one last week that was a headhunter looking for a research director to do something. I don't even remember. I'm not looking right now, so I didn't really pay attention. But headhunters and recruiters do use LinkedIn like crazy to try to find good candidates for jobs. That's not to say that people aren't applying for those jobs. People are applying for the jobs too. But the headhunters and recruiters are tasked with making sure they have the best applicant pool possible. So if it's a large company, say Facebook, that has a whole small army of recruiters working for them, those recruiters are searching your skills. And I have been found by the one that I ended up working for, been found by a couple of others. I've talked to Facebook a couple of times. It's just a really powerful way. If you're job searching, you do not want to just sit down and you don't want to just sit back and try to let people come to you. That's not going to be a very effective strategy, but it can happen. And so you want to be available for that. A couple of LinkedIn specific questions that I'm seeing. Am I using the free version or paying for it? I'm using the free version at the moment. When I was job searching at one point, I went on to the paid version. You don't necessarily have to do that. You get a few more details and a few features if you pay for it. And you can activate something on your profile that alerts recruiters that you are actively looking for a job. So it can be advantageous, but it's not necessary. I've only done that once, I believe. Does LinkedIn allow you to specify geographic preference? Absolutely. You can search across the United States. You can search in New York City. You can search in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Yeah, it's generally clustered by metro areas, but you can search by geographic preference. So moving on to the next topic, this will hit a few questions, I think. Converting a CV to a resume and applying for jobs. This is probably one of the biggest questions I get, is how do you make a CV a resume? How do you appropriately represent your experience, particularly if you're a grad student who has just gone straight, perhaps you went undergrad straight to grad school, and now you're looking for what's essentially your first job. It can be tricky to communicate all of that in an effective way. Part of what I'm going to show you is a result of my own trial and error and lessons that I learned along the way. This first section is a big part of it. Your first section should be professional experience, not employment, not anything else, not research experience, not teaching experience, professional experience. You want to put everything that you can under this heading, particularly if, like I said, you went straight from undergrad to grad school and now you're looking for a job. This is how you communicate that you haven't just been in school. You've been actively building your career while you're getting a PhD. And that's a key difference that I learned the hard way. I'll share a little bit more on that. So a couple of examples here from some real, people's resumes. So these are both examples of graduate school experiences. The top one is a PhD. The bottom one is a master's degree. The master's degree was the lab assignment throughout the program. And you see how this person, not only did they report it like a normal job, MA researcher and graduate intern. So it's clear that this person was a graduate student, but they reported it like a regular job. So it's taken into account as this is real professional experience. And I was the person hiring, so that was how I took it. And so you see how they put this together and listed out the very concrete things they did. The research resulting in an MA thesis, data entry, huge, data entry, any data, anything, data entry, data wrangling, all great things to list out. Supervised undergraduate students, oh, they have supervisory experience. Facilitated professional development workshops, these are just all the little things that you do as part of a graduate assistantship or an internship that maybe you don't think about, but you should list them in this way. Going back to this top one, this was work, again, with surveys, pre-tested questionnaires, trained supervisors and interviewers, edited and wrote reports, conducted interviews. This was all as a research assistant, but it was a real job too. As far as teaching goes, you know, you have the same thing. It's experience. You're overseeing undergraduates. You're overseeing grading. You're working with professors. There are all kinds of things to list out. And the advantage of doing this as a professional experience section instead of an employment or anything else is this question that just popped up. How can you frame research you do on the side if you're a teaching assistant? That's the beauty of the professional experience category as opposed to employment. You include your research projects here too. If you did a project with a professor, you would put it down as research assistants or whatever you worked out as the title for that. You would put the dates that you worked on it, and you would put the tests that you did. If you clean data, if it resulted in a publication, all of that goes here. So that's why it's phrased specifically as professional experience rather than employment. Another question relevant to the current topic, do research institutes and nonprofits look for CVs or resumes? There is some variance there. I did kind of a hybrid for my current position because I knew the organization, I knew that they knew, I knew the person reading it would know what they were looking at and the value of the more academic-y things. But it just depends on the organization. You're usually safer to send a resume, and then if they ask for more detail, you can send a CV. And just for reference, this is the first page of my own kind of hybrid CV resume, but this is how I have mine set up. Obviously now I have, quite a reasonable amount of things. One thing that I'll point out kind of along, well, this was paid, so it was employment, but things that I did on the side. I've done 2 different rounds of sitting on election decision desks. And so I've got that in my professional experience too, because I did it. It was a paying gig. That doesn't matter for a professional experience section, but I did it. And I don't want to just ignore that fact on my resume. I want to get credit for the fact that I have this expertise and I have been on these decision desks. So that's one thing to point out. The other thing is at the very bottom here, I have my postdoc and my graduate assistant work. Those used to be bigger sections when they were the main things on my resume. That is where I learned the hard way. So I won't say which job, but at one of my past jobs, I was in a situation where I discovered I was being underpaid relative to people who were ranked lower than me. And so when I brought this up and said, this seems problematic, they gave me the line of, well, years of experience matter, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's true. Years of experience do matter in how much you're getting paid. And there is some overlap where, reasonably a lower ranked person could be paid higher because of more years experience. But I didn't think that seemed right in my case. So I said, wait a minute, how many years of experience are you giving me credit for? And the HR person looked it up, and it turns out they were only giving me credit for everything after my PhD. And so I went back and said, no. That work I did while doing my PhD was in my field. I was gathering skills. I was working in the field. That counts. And so that was when I reorganized this. I previously had my graduate assistant job listed with education. pulled it out and went with this format. So you always have to make sure people are giving you credit. After your professional experience section, you want to do an education section. Keep it simple. Non-academic jobs, we don't really care who your committee is or, you know, what your dissertation is. I've seen some where they, you know, you have a small paragraph about your dissertation. You know, that's just not something that people are looking for in a non-academic job. What we are looking for is a technical skills section, particularly if it's a data science job or anything quantitative. Technical skills list everything. I will point out this Voxco thing. That's a reasonably obscure survey software. Well, it's not obscure in survey world. It's obscure if you're not in survey world. That is used to make phone calls for survey purposes. I'm pretty sure having this on my resume is what got me the job at Marist, because they happen to use the same software that I was familiar with. And so the fact that that was on my resume sent it to the top of the stack, so that then I got an interview, and then, you know, I ended up with the job, you know, obviously for other reasons, but it helped get me to the top of the stack. For a one-pager, that's it. I see a couple of questions about length. We're getting there. There is some variance. For a one-pager, if you're just sending a resume cold, you don't really know where it's going, you don't know who's reading it for sure, one-pager is good, 2 pages max. If it's longer form, like my long form one is 5 pages. And it has publications, selected conference presentations, working papers, service and memberships, because I have kept doing all of that, which I'll talk more about in a moment. I know there's some questions about that as well. And since I have more professional experience, I have my teaching in a separate section. If you are, you know, if that's the primary experience that you have is teaching, you obviously don't want to put teaching in a separate section. But given the types of jobs that I've been applying for and my experience at this point in my career, I've put teaching at the end. But you notice I said earlier on professional experience, you put everything you've been doing as a graduate assistant. And just to be clear, that does include part-time jobs. So you put unpaid stuff as professional experience, you put part-time things as professional experience. A couple of cautions. So if you're applying to large companies, government, corporate environment, the US government system is very, very automated. So just a heads up there. Resumes often go through automated software. So make sure you're using keywords from job ads. There is an element to tailoring from your job ad. And I have been warned that LaTeX might not go through the automated software well. My own is LaTeX, and you know, I haven't noted any problems with it, but I also haven't been applying to large place jobs. So it is probably best if you think it's going, if you don't know where you're applying and you don't know what sort of software they might put it through, it's probably a good idea to have a simple Word version or a non-LaTeX PDF. Where to apply? You're looking for things that say advanced degree preferred. Minimum education is rarely going to say PhD, so don't look there. Look for advanced degree preferred. You're not looking at entry-level stuff, but you're not necessarily looking high level either. So you're kind of aiming for a middle ground where they want some experience, which you're going to demonstrate in your professional experience section, but not necessarily, definitely not entry level either. Search on skills terms, not job titles. Job titles are just all over the map. Every organization has a different way of assigning job titles. If you get a hit on a job that sounds interesting in your search, don't discount it just because it's a weird job title or it's not a job title you think you have. Jumping back up a little, if they say, when job ads say PhD preferred, they mean they're probably looking for a PhD person. So that's a good signal. That's advanced degree preferred, PhD preferred. Those are the types of language. I just mean very rarely will you see someone say that a PhD is the minimum. So, like I mentioned, you can search by cities on LinkedIn. You're certainly going to search by cities. The cities listed might not be comprehensive, especially with corporate jobs. So don't limit yourself geographically in your initial applications unless you have, concrete reasons that you have to be in a certain geographic area. That's one thing, one difference as well. With academic jobs, you kind of take what you get, and you may end up in somewhere odd because colleges and universities are not often in large cities. With non-academic jobs, you're more likely to be in a city if that's what you choose, or state capitals if you're in state government. Federal government has lots of different locations depending on the agency. So, but generally, as in a generality, you're looking at more of kind of a city life with non-academic jobs. That also means they're going to probably pay better. The pay rates, the kind of average starting rates for data scientists are well over $100,000. Facebook, I know, prorates based on the number of years since your PhD. I'm not for sure where the start point is, but it's well into six figures. Think tanks, nonprofits, those types of things generally pay less, perhaps more on par with an academic job. So there's a lot of variance in pay depending on where you are. That was another question along the way. But the fact that a lot of corporate jobs are in cities automatically raise the pay rate. You will apply for lots of things. This is where I don't know how to compare it to the academic market, but you will apply for lots of things. So apply liberally. Don't only apply for 3 or 4 jobs. And always look for people you might know who work somewhere. Those connections are always good for a leg up. And so if you have any connection to anyone who works at the place you're applying to, drop a note. Again, that's another one of those things that's extremely common. A couple of quick words about cover letters. Tailor them for each job you want. Make the connections clear. Opening paragraph, here's why I want this job. Discuss relevant experience in more detail than your resume allows. Now, this is a place where if your dissertation is relevant, you'll discuss your dissertation. I put that under a don't, largely because, of course, in an academic cover letter, you're going to talk about your dissertation. You don't need a big long paragraph about your dissertation unless it's directly related to the job. Then you do. So that's where you would put the dissertation information if it is relevant. And just checking off that I answered that question. Don't mention any academic market experiences. Don't telegraph that you're only interested because the academic market didn't work out. Don't write more than a page, page and a half max. So keep your cover letter short. Discuss the skills and interests that make you ideal for the job, why you want it, and keep it simple. Again, as with the resume, you tailor this to each job that you want, and make sure you're using, not overusing, I mean, there is a limit, but make sure you're using the terms that the job ad is using. If they're looking for someone who can do machine learning, make sure you're not talking about logistic regression. Cover letters are not always required along with the resume, but it's generally a good idea. Always pay attention. So on LinkedIn, it's very easy in some cases to push a button that says apply now and just send a resume. Make sure you've actually read the job ad to know if they want a cover letter and send it. So the last time I was hiring, we had a cover letter required, and basically anybody who clicked the apply now button who didn't also send us a cover letter was not considered. So make sure you send that cover letter. If you find a typo in your resume or cover letter, that's a question that just popped up on here. I would honestly not worry about it. If it's a small typo, I would just let it go. You know, if it's something fairly major, I would follow up with a new version. Interviews and offers. I want to try to get to more Q&A, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. I think I've mentioned quite a bit of this along the way. Interview experiences vary widely. If you're at a large company, you're likely to go through a recruiter or an HR department. These are screeners who don't have the technical expertise. If you're contacted by a recruiter or an HR person, they're looking for fit with the company and that you have basically the experience that they're looking for. These are not going to be your technical people. Data science and technical jobs will require some sort of skills assessment. This takes on a lot of different forms. I've seen lots of different types of this. It can be a coding exercise. It can be a take home. Here's a data set. What do you do with it? You know, you might be brought in to do something in the office. For the last time that I hired, I just had people kind of fill out a questionnaire of, okay, what's, you know, I was hiring for survey research, so I had people writing survey questions and doing a few kind of skills assessment, things like that. This is just a place where it's incredibly widely variant, so you should be prepared for some type of skills assessment, but they're all company specific, so it's not clear what you might get. You might end up with a few hours of interviewing all in one day, but you're not going to do a fly-out style marathon interview. The one exception to that might be for alt academic jobs, because they are at colleges and universities, so they might be more of that kind of academic style fly-out thing. And one thing that I ran into, I ended up getting my current job, so I didn't pursue it, but at one place I was looking, they would interview and hire data scientists, and then you go to this job fair type thing, like you're guaranteed to get a job, they've already hired you, but you go to this job fair type of thing where you talk to different teams and you figure out what team to be on. So that could be an example of something you might find. things to negotiate with an offer. So these are some really critical things, and some of you have been asking about several of these. Your ability to continue researching and continue doing independent research is something that you should ask about. Not everyone allows it. Corporate places often have restrictions of like anything you produce as part of your job is property of the company. And so academic style publishing is not really something that's possible. I have never been told no to this, but I also haven't gone to work for a large corporation either. I do have a couple of academic publications. I think I'm up to 3 peer-reviewed publications, and I've done quite a few book chapters. So you will see an article in Social Science Quarterly that has Huffington Post as the affiliation of the author. So that's kind of fun. I have a couple of things coming out recently that have PRRI as the author affiliation. So you just have to check that out. If that's something that's really important to you to continue doing, you have to ask about it in the interview offer stage. If it's really important to you, ask about it at the interview stage, so that you know ahead of time and can weigh that for yourself in your own decision making. Is there conference professional development support, things you want to improve on? This will vary. Conference support depends on how far removed you are from academia. Where I am now, my boss is also a PhD. You know, we interact a lot with academics. We do plenty of work with academics. So so I've always had support for that, but you do need to make sure, again, if that's something that's important to you, make sure you know what is possible. Research support. So one thing that academics negotiate a lot is funds for conducting research. It's really not going to be likely on this side of the fence. You're going to ask for what's necessary for your job duties, probably not going to get, you know, a research budget per se, like you might at a top academic place. I've already talked about counting experience, make sure it counts. Grad school is not just school. That a lot is the design of your resume. If you take nothing else away from this, take that. And find out how salaries are determined. It's hard for me to speak in generalities about salaries because they are so place and type of job specific. But do be aware that, for example, nonprofits are required to disclose certain things. So, you know, if it's a nonprofit job, you can look up some salary information, do some research on what jobs like the one that you're negotiating for make. Don't get lowballed just because the salary sounds great. It can be really easy. Again, personal experience, I did this. I was like, oh my God, that salary sounds amazing. Yes, let me sign. And come to find out later, I was being underpaid. So don't do that. My cat's going to participate too. So now what? I want to get to some questions. So I want to keep moving through this. This is my last section. The timeline. So this is where you have good news. If you're not sure, most non-academic jobs want to fill positions as quickly as they can. So you don't apply until you're just about ready to go. So you're close to your defense or graduation, or whenever it is that you're ready to take the job. If you're not a grad student, you know, whatever that marker is that you're ready to take a job. You don't apply for these a year in advance. More good news is that that means you can see how the academic market goes before you need to apply for non-academic jobs. If you want to. Like I said, I never did that. I decided non-academic was my route. That was great. If you want to see how the academic market goes, great. The less good news is that it still may take a little time to find the right thing. So particularly in the context right now. So universities are hurting. We know the academic job market is likely to not be the greatest. It's unclear what's happening in the non-academic world. There are some places that are thriving. The large tech companies are doing great. Facebook is still hiring like crazy. I know I've mentioned them several times. It's just I happen to know kind of what their processes look like. You know, it's unclear what the situation will be, you know, say in May for the rest of the non-academic world. You know, we do have budget struggles, particularly on the nonprofit side of things. So it could still take a little time, and there is no guarantee that you're going to find the perfect thing. So it's, you know, it's not a guarantee, is what I'm saying. Is this for me? Well, I mean, you're the only one who knows that. The biggest thing I can think of is the difference between working a 9-to-5 for someone else or, you know, having the more flexible academic lifestyle. I feel like in non-academic world, you have more choice over where you live, but you're not going to teach full-time. If you want to teach full-time, this is not the way to go. Whatever you do, my advice would be just to go into it with an open mind. We don't do brilliant jerk types out here. You all know what I'm talking about, the people that are super, super smart, but they're a jerk. That doesn't get tolerated so much in non-academic world. So if you come in with kind of a bad attitude, it's not going to work well. Talking to your advisor, I would start with questions. How do they feel? Do they know anyone who's done that? If you get negative responses, if they start saying, no, that's horrible, you can't do that, I would try to go to another committee member or another person in your department and see if you can get someone more supportive before broaching it with your advisor again. If you get positive responses, great. Just be aware that your advisor may not have a ton of advice if they've always been an academic. So this is where, you know, getting active on LinkedIn and sending those cold, you know, requests for informational discussions kind of becomes important. If there's no support at all in your department, I'm very sorry. There should be, and it sucks if there's not. Find your network. Go to Twitter, go to LinkedIn, you know, get a network. And finally, what if you're not sure? You have time. I mean, my best recommendation at this point, if you were planning on the academic market this year, see what it does for you. See what the postdoc market looks like. Postdocs can be an entree to academic or non-academic. So it, you know, you can kind of kick the can down the road there. A lot of postdocs will probably be aiming you toward academic careers, but if that's not the right decision for you, then you go a different direction. Of the people who have had the postdoc that I had at Duke, we're about half and half, going academic and non-academic. And finally, just here's my contact info, and let me start working through some of these questions on the Q&A. All right, so I'm gonna go back up to the top. Starting salary difference between non-academic and academic, it varies. I think I've mostly addressed that. It is difficult to say for sure. Corporate is generally going to start higher than academic, usually into 6 figures, especially for data science jobs. Long-term stability of, can you please talk about the long-term stability for the non-ac jobs in each category? So this is where your thinking might need to be a little bit different than an academic track. You know, academic track, you're thinking I'll get a job and I have 6 years to make tenure. Non-academic, you know, you're giving up that stability to a degree. You're definitely not signing a contract for any length of time. You're not guaranteed a job for 6 years. I mean, you might not be in academia either. I'm not saying that, but compared to a tenure track job, there is less security and stability in the non-academic world. Given the pandemic, we know the economy is a little messy. So I think that changes how I would answer this question too. Again, large companies are generally going to be pretty stable right now. Large tech companies, Peloton, I think they're one of the only ones making money right now. So, you know, that's one of those where I just can't give like a blanket answer. Academic publishing careers. Any insights into most PhD careers in scientific publishing? I'm not sure. I think publishing careers are probably more along the alt academic lines. I think that's a good option if it's something that you enjoy and that you would get excited about. And it definitely keeps you connected to kind of the academic world. So if you ended up working at an academic publisher, I'd say that would be a good position too. Okay, to what degree can you, is it the case that once you exit academia, it's harder to publish in scholarly journals? I have not found that to be true. I've never been turned away or anything from a journal because of not having an academic affiliation. I'm sure the counterpoint might exist, but I haven't seen it. Does dissertation research count as years of experience? Absolutely, yes. That goes under your professional experience. One of the best things you can do is describe your dissertation in terms of project management, because a lot of people want project management experience. You just managed a really big project. Am I still publishing? Yes. Does publishing matter for alt ac jobs? It depends on where they are. If it's a research-oriented alt academic job, probably. Is there a need for qualitative research skills or mostly quantitative? I would say mostly quantitative, but qualitative definitely has its place. I spoke a little bit about that. How can current PhD students leverage their dissertations and the work they would put in to better prepare them for the non-academic job market? Should we reimagine the dissertation in a way that caters to the industry? I haven't put a lot of thought into that. I think the best answer I have is how to leverage it. You know, I don't really have much to say on reimagining. That's a bit of a different can of worms, but leveraging it, like I just said, pitch it as project management. Certainly if the topic is related to the topic of the job that you're applying for, you leverage that as well. But in general, it's just really huge project management. You had to come up with an idea, you had to go through these steps, you had to defend it, you had to collect data in whatever form your data came, qualitative or quantitative. And you had to see it through, and you essentially wrote a book in the end, or you wrote 3 publishable papers. So I think it's just a matter of thinking about it from a project management lens. For PhDs using qualitative research or humanities, what sort of data skills quant training would I recommend? So I would recommend that you, well, for one thing, you're in the ICPSR summer program, so you're on the right track. Anything basic dealing with working on data. So something as simple as being adept at Excel is a great skill to have. You'd be amazed how many people can't work in Excel at all. Knowing any one statistical program, so we use Stata. I'm personally primarily an R user, but at my organization, we use Stata. Well, if somebody knows SPSS, but not Stata on their resume, I'm not going to overlook them because they don't have Stata. I'm going to see SPSS and say, oh, well, they know what they're doing with data. So, I can probably teach them Stata. I discussed the length of the resume. I discussed salaries. If the non-academic position does not require a doctoral degree, what is my suggestion regarding how to represent work as a doctoral student? I would do the same thing. I would not do anything different, actually. I would just say, I would put it under your professional experience, and I would not do that any differently. You're still demonstrating that you have that experience. When the job post requires PhD but doesn't mention that PhD candidates can also apply for it, does that mean they're only looking for people who have received PhDs? Probably yes, but in non-academic terms, because like I said, we're looking to fill these jobs as quickly as possible. So if it's asking for you to have a PhD, it's assuming you have the PhD in hand. Are you going to be judged in non-academia versus academia if you have an extended postdoc experience? Probably going to matter a lot less in non-academic. I'm not going to speak to the academic side. I don't have that expertise. I don't know how an extended postdoc experience would be judged. But in non-academic, I would just treat it as experience like anything else. Questions are racking up almost as quickly as I'm answering them. So we're not going to get to everything, but I'm going to try to knock through as many of these as possible. Internships, how internships might prove useful in gaining access to tech. There are some companies that do PhD internships. I believe I've seen Facebook offer these, possibly Google. So certainly, if you see that type of opportunity and you're interested in that career, jump on it. Because what that's going to do is give you a very solid entry in your professional experience. And it's also possible that it opens the door to getting a full-time position at that company. I don't know for sure if that's how it works when they offer those, but I would imagine that's part of the design, is they want people to come work for them short term and then potentially be long-term hires. What level of statistical analysis is adequate? That is highly dependent on the job you're applying for. If you're applying for a data science position, you're going to need to be familiar with machine learning concepts and possibly AI. If you're applying for analyst positions, it's going to be highly variable. At my place, the most advanced thing we do is a logistic regression. Certainly we have the capacity to do more than that, but we do things for public release, therefore we don't do advanced statistics for our typical products. But that's going to depend on the job. Is it possible to negotiate further development in areas that you're still a bit green in right away, or something you discuss later? So this is that professional development point. I would discuss this when you have a job offer. Is it appropriate to put volunteer experience on a resume? I would say that depends on whether the volunteer experience is directly applicable to that job. The example here is working with a nonprofit that rescued children. If you're applying for a job doing research with a nonprofit that works on those issues, you would absolutely want to mention that. If you're applying for a data science job at Google, it's probably not going to be that relevant. How do you respond to corporate recruiters who say that you don't have enough corporate experience, even though you have the data analytical skills for the job? This is that catch-22. And sometimes jobs, it's like, you don't have the experience. Well, how am I supposed to get the experience if I don't have a job? You know, you end up in that circle. At that point, I would just move on to the next thing and find a different opportunity. If they're telling you that you don't have enough experience, or thank you, but you're better off just to let it go. You know, the joke, some of you will get this, some of you won't, but there's the joke of, he's just not that into you. They're just not that into you. It's nothing personal, just go on to the next opportunity. Some resources to find more salary information. Glassdoor. If you've never heard of Glassdoor, get familiar with it now. It's a place that collects salary information from people go in and they register their salary information. Along the same lines, some job postings post salary range. I had the experience that HR has negotiated above the range. That is dependent. Often the top of the range is the top of the range and that's it, especially at a larger company where they're going to have very well-defined salary bands. It never hurts to ask, is kind of the answer there. Non-traditional student, are employers okay with hiring someone perhaps a little older with a recent PhD? I would say absolutely yes. I have not known of that to be an issue. Should one be applying now if the non-academic market is slowing down due to the pandemic? That's hard to answer, because if you get a job before you finish your PhD, your chances of finishing go down, and you want to finish. If you're confident that if you do get a job, you will have the determination to complete your dissertation, I would say go for it. But just like I said, we don't know what the market looks like next spring. It could be good. So it could be better than it is now, or it could be worse than it is now. We just have no idea. So I don't have a great answer to that one. What's the protocol for following up after an interview and application submission? I would generally give people about a week and then just send an email. If DC job is your goal, would you recommend defending and moving up, or apply from where you are now if you're about a day's drive? I would say apply from where you are. I certainly wouldn't recommend moving unless you already have a job in hand, because who knows, you might find something else in a different place. But if that's your goal, I mean, certainly when you write cover letters to apply for jobs in DC, you should say, my goal is to be in DC. That'll probably get you around your current location. I don't know how strict we are on time, but we are at 9 o'clock.
So I'm going to say, Natalie, that in terms of the conversation we had about having you come to visit, we're at the upper end. If you can answer a few more questions, that'd be great. But we're not going to get to the end. You and I could talk about a way that you could subsequently maybe answer a few, but let's just say that we'll take 5 more questions. You'll take 5 more questions, and then we'll quit for the evening, and then we have ways to communicate with the participants about alternative ways to answer their questions. Does that seem fair to you?
That works great for me.
Okay.
So, right. Want to be selective and get so can you describe data science in terms of academic skills and standard social science degrees? So this is a good one. So data science can mean anything and everything. You'll see a lot of variance in what people want. This is why I say to search for jobs based on search terms, not job titles. So in terms of a standard social science degree, your data science skills that you're picking up are your methods classes. Most programs, either you're going to have your standard methods sequence, or you've come to the ICPSR summer program and you're getting additional quantitative skills this way. So all of those fit into data science. Data science can most generally means applying data to solve a problem. And that's actually something that social scientists are really good at, as it turns out. We're trained to develop thinking on a problem, collect some data, and answer the question. And that's what a lot of data science boils down to. The specific techniques will vary a lot. Sometimes you'll be asked to do, you'll be looking for machine learning or artificial intelligence. Sometimes it'll be as simple as regressions, which those categories are not mutually exclusive. So I would just read job ads carefully to know what they're looking for. Once you leave academia, can you get back in? This is a big question. I have not witnessed anyone being successful at this. I have also not witnessed anyone trying to do this. In general, I think it would be very difficult to get back in unless you're able to keep a steady pipeline of publications going. You know, and if you're able to do that, great. There might be an entree back in. In general, I think the main thing that I've seen and that I kind of have half an eyeball on is professor of the practice, you know, where after someone's had a long-ish or a few years in a career, you're hired in as the practical person. I think those are more likely than coming back to start a tenure track job. Personally, after a few years of working in the non-academic world, I would not want to go back and start over as a beginning assistant professor. Your life kind of moves on beyond that, but certainly I think it is challenging. That's not to say it can't be done. but it would be challenging to shift back, and you would have to really make sure you kept publishing. Does it matter how much time you spend in the PhD program? No, probably not. Just a couple more. In the development world, people sometimes do informational interviews where you request meetings with people who may or may not be looking to hire someone. Can you speak to those? That's more kind of the LinkedIn outreach that I was talking about. Certainly, people are generally very open to those sort of things. In most of the circles I travel in, which is mostly survey research, I may not be hiring, but I'm perfectly happy to talk to you and give you my insight into the field and learn about your interests and that sort of thing. In the old days, you know, in the before times, we would go for coffee and do that. Now we're doing everything virtually, but it still happens. So I would encourage that sort of thing, yes. And let me do, how to form the reference list for non-academic job search besides your dissertation chair. So when I did my first search, all of my references were academics. It was my postdoc supervisor, my dissertation chair, and another professor. And that's just kind of how it is when you're doing that first job. You want it to be people who are on board with the fact that you're looking for non-academic jobs, so that they're, you know, positive references and they don't get on the phone with somebody and say, well, I don't even know why they're applying for this job. So you want it to be supportive people, but if they are all professors, you'll be okay, because you just want to make sure that they're able to talk about your work in the way that you've pitched it for the job. So, you know, you share your cover letter and resume with them for that position, so that they're aware of how you're pitching yourself and what they should focus on. That's something you should probably do that's probably standard practice for academic jobs. So that's likely not a big difference. Even for my most recent job, I believe 2 of my 3 references were still professors. As long as they can speak to your body of work and your work ethic and that sort of thing, you're good. You'll often find that reference checks are the last thing that people do in non-academic jobs. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to hire this person. Let's do the reference checks just to make sure no big red flags pop up. And I think I'll stop there because I'm starting to lose my voice a little.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, to the participants who've asked this question a couple of times, I want to remind you that all of the Blaylock lectures are recorded. And so this will be available on the summer program's YouTube channel probably over the weekend, or certainly by Monday. But that's a minor technical thing. I want to say thank you very much to Natalie for this very interesting and stimulating presentation. Next time you prepare your CV for an entry into the job market, I want you to note that you presided over the highest attendance Blaylock lecture of the 2020 ICPSR summer program. This has been great, as you can tell from the Q&A and the chat comments. For a variety of reasons, there's a lot of interest in this topic. Some of it is circumstantial because of, you know, this period in which we find ourselves, but also because graduate training in general has taken on a different meaning with, you know, different job opportunities. And it's been great for the participants to be able to hear from and interact with somebody who has actually had experience in the alt academic world. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. We have 3 more Blaylock lectures next week in the last week of the summer program. I look forward to seeing you then.